Hello, I'm Miss Julie,
And I'm Miss Bonnie.
and we're from the Owen County Public Library here in Kentucky, and we're going to be talking to you about life on the frontier.
That's right. And one thing we need to mention too is about how important families were. They worked together, they played together, they traveled together, and so it's good for you to gather with your families, to ask for family stories, and to keep that history alive because it's part of the history of America.
So we have artifacts from pioneer times, and we're just going to talk about some of them today.
Okay. And first of all, we want to tell a little bit difference between the people who lived on the East Coast, who had a little bit more money, and the people who lived out here on the frontier of Kentucky. They were usually poorer people. They didn't have a lot of money, and that's why they came, because the land was cheap, and they could own a bit of their own land, plant their own gardens, and live comfortably.
Yeah, it was their chance to make their way in the world.
That's right.
Okay. So let's go back 200 years, and if you needed to carry something, there were no plastic bags. Plastic wasn't invented. So one of the ways they would carry things would be in a basket. Anybody know what a basket's made out of? If you said wood, you were right. They would cut down the tree, and then they would take little slivers and make the basket. But a tree is long and straight. How did they get it curved?
Can you tell me?
Well, they would have soaked the splints in the water, and then they could have woven it into a basket. So this is just, baskets came in all sizes. They could be real little, and I have a basket at my house that is a Kentucky basket, and it's like that big. And they would have used that to carry the food, the ears of corn, to the animals. So baskets are one way.
And also, you have to notice that baskets, when Julie said woven, what weaving means is going in and out and in and out and in and out. And that's how weaving is done, whether it's baskets or a cloth. And I know some of you have woven mats, maybe at one of our programs here. And so that's what weaving is.
And when you talk about weaving, this is a woven coverlet. And they would have had a great big loom, and they would have woven the design on it. And if you look on the back, then it was the other side of the yarn, and this would have been the winter side, and this would be the summer side. But back to carrying things, what's something else they would have used to carry?
Well, what about this? As you notice, it also is made of wood, but it's got something around it. Any ideas what that is?
It's not wood. That band is not wood.
No. It's a piece of metal. And the reason they do that is because if I just had wood there, this might fall apart. So they keep the bands around the wooden buckets to keep them in place. Now, one thing about wooden buckets you have to understand is wood swells. In other words, it gets bigger, or it shrinks and it gets smaller. Like if I left this out in the sun, these pieces of wood would shrink, and if I tried to put water in, guess what would happen? What do you think would happen? It would start leaking. So in frontier times, you always kept a bucket of water with water in it because it kept the bucket swelled, and you could get your dipper water or whatever you needed the water for. That was one of the children's jobs, is to go get the water every day.
Now, if you were more affluent and had more money, you might have a metal bucket. This is a brass bucket. And that was also used on the frontier, and they like to cook in these kettles too, brass kettle.
Right.
What about storing food, storing things? There was no plastic container again, no glass jars out here, so they would have made jugs and crocks out of this. Look what this is made out of. Any idea? Something that comes from the ground. You can find it along a creek. Do you think they know, Bonnie?
I don't know. Maybe we need to tell them.
It is clay. They would take the clay and form it to make jugs. Now this used to have a handle on it. And this is a real early Kentucky jug.
Yes. And they would they would fire it. In other words, they would harden it and put a glaze on it to keep it. Now, when we were talking about water buckets, we also have these things. Any idea what these are? They're both called the same thing, but look at how different they are.
And these grow in Kentucky, if that's a hint.
Yes, you might even have some in your garden.
Well, let's go ahead and tell them.
These are gourds. Now, you notice the difference in the gourds, but this would be more common to use for water. And tell Miss Julie, tell them how.
Well, this gourd I got last year, and I let it dry, just put it in the closet and let it dry, and now it's real hard, and the seeds are inside. And what I was going to do was cut a hole in it, and then I can use it for a dipper to dip water or other things, right?
Yes. How do you think they had lights? Now, we didn't have electricity, remember? How do you think? And if you haven't seen our episode on butter, you need to see that one too, because we talk about not having electricity and how they kept things cold. How else would they have some light? Do you have any ideas? How would they have light if we didn't have any light bulbs or electricity?
Well, if there's no electricity, there's also no heat.
That's
so
right.
in the morning when you get up, it is cold in your house.
Right.
So let's think, what would they have to make their house warm? If you set a fireplace, you are right.
Right. And then you would use the fireplace not only to keep warm, but you had to have a fire all year round to do your cooking.
So they would get some light from the fireplace, but what if you went far away from the fireplace? They need some way to carry that light away.
Right. And that would be probably with candles. Now, candles, early frontier people made their candles by dipping them. They would melt tallow, which is part of animal fat, and they would dip them, and what you do is you take your string and you dip it down. Now, you can't let the tallow too hot because every time you would dip it, it would melt what was on the string. So you have to have it warm enough that it would stay there. Now, if you were lucky, you would have beeswax. One of the most desired gifts that you could give someone when they get married on the frontier was a beehive. Not only for the beeswax, but for the honey, which we'll get into that in a little bit. So you would make your candles. If you were well-to-do, you might have a candle mold, which means you would pour the liquid wax into a mold and it would harden. You would have your candles perfectly shaped. This is just a dip candle, and we would put those either in a candle holder, which Julie has several different ones,
Or a lantern.
or a lantern. That would have been more common.
Now this lantern is the same style that Paul Revere used. And if you ever heard of Paul Revere, there's a famous poem by Longfellow that goes, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." And it goes on to tell the story that they needed to send a signal to the troops of which way the British were going to come. So he hung a lantern or two up in the Old North Church. And this is the style. He would have had a candle in it, and it's made out of tin. And this is my Paul Revere-like lantern.
Now on the frontier, they may have made lanterns out of wood. Now you'll notice my wood lantern, though, has this in it, because if I put a candle in there, what's going to happen, do you think, eventually when the candle melts down? It may burn the wood. And so I have a candle holder. This is copper, and I have a candle holder that I would put inside my lantern. The top is also copper, and one of the reasons is this will get very hot if your candle is very high. And sometimes it's got to be higher so you can, if you wanted to read in the evening or basically see anything away from do any writing.
Or do needlework.
Yes, and sewing. Then you would need a light for that.
Now here's another way you might have got light into your pioneer home. This is a tin candle sconce, and the candle fits right down in just like she said. Now I've got a question for you. Why do you think they made this tin behind it? If you said to reflect the candlelight, you're right. It made it brighter by having this tin behind it. And the tinsmith was a very important job because the tinsmith would make the candle holders. They would also make designs into the tin. And you may have seen a cabinet, if your grandma, great-grandma likes antiques, she may have something called a pie safe. It's a wooden cabinet and then it has tin, because tin was less expensive than glass.
Right.
And they would put this, so the air would flow through. So this would be an example.
And they would, how do you think they would make this picture on here? Any ideas? Miss Julie, can you tell me?
Well, the tinsmith may have a template, and this is a true template from a tinsmith to make a pie safe, and use that, and he's going to poke holes through that with a hammer and a tool.
Right. I mean, it could have been a nail. They did have nails. They were different than nails today, but they could have poked with a hammer and but it was a long process. You have to understand that this is not instant production. It took maybe a long time, maybe days, weeks to do. If you were good at it, maybe just a few days to make the design on a piece of tin, and that's how they made their living.
They also made tin lanterns that would be all, instead of glass, like I said, this is more wealthy person, but it could have the tin all the way around it with the holes, and that allowed the air in for it.
Right. So any ideas about how you would write a letter? If you wanted to write a letter home, didn't have pencils, didn't have pens, might have paper. Paper was pretty rare too. But, have you ever written with a feather? My goodness. I think Miss Julie had some programs that you would write with a feather. Do you want to tell them about the feather?
Well, this is a turkey feather found right here in Owen County. And all we did was cut it off to make it into a point, and you dip it in your ink, and then you can write. But it's slow writing because of the ink, and also will like glob up. It's a skill.
It is a skill, and in fact you might be able to form 1 or 2 letters every time you dip that.
Yeah.
What happens in this is the way you cut it is the ink is supposed to go up here and stay up there a little bit so that you would have extra ink a little bit, but you could probably only make it 2 or 3 letters.
Wow.
Okay, so what are these, Julie, that?
Well, this is what the would have carried your gunpowder in. And this is really a horn from an animal, and they put a plug here and a plug here, and then they would have poured that into their measuring thing and then put that into their gun.
And if you look at our first episode, Mr. Strassel is there with weapons and tools of the frontier, and he shows you how to use the gunpowder in one of these horns.
Now this would be the frontiersman's gunpowder holder,
Right.
is what you call it. And this, if you were more well off, this is a metal one.
Right.
And I don't know because this is how you just open it with this. You still had to measure it with this.
Well, the thing is, a lot of people knew their weapons. They knew about how much powder you had to put in. And so sometimes they did guess. Now, if you guess and you overload your gun, it could cause a problem.
But there's 2 different gunpowder
Yes.
ways to carry your gunpowder.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Should we talk about some animals on the farm?
Yes.
The farm would have had a cow,
Right.
because you need the cow for the milk. Probably had a hog,
Yes.
because the hogs could go out and forage, and then they would butcher that once a year, and they would get the fat from it for the lard. But another animal that you don't see very much around here, well, there's some, but not as
Right.
common, would be sheep. What do you think they got from the sheep? Well, if you said wool, you're right. Here is a piece of wool that was just cut right from the sheep, you don't kill the sheep, you just give it a haircut. You just cut its hair in the spring, and here is some dirty wool. I wish you could smell it. Oh, it smells like it's been out in the mud and worse. So here it is. The pioneer woman, family, girls, they would have to wash the wool and comb it or card it. And here is some wool that's already been cleaned and combed. From this, they would spin it and make yarn.
Yes, they make yarn, basically strings, so they can make wool socks. They can knit wool socks.
They would have made a coverlet like this.
Yes.
And you may have heard of quilts. Maybe you all have a quilt at your house. Quilt is not wool. It's the cotton, pieces of cotton sewn together on the front and the back. And then in the middle, you put something warm. So it most likely could have been some wool to add warmth, and then they sew all the pieces together. That's the difference between a quilt and a coverlet. This is all woven, this is and wool, and this is cotton.
Right. And then also with the quilts, they were very common on the frontier. And what a wife would do, a mother would do, is they wear their clothes till basically there was nothing left, except maybe little scraps. And she would save all those scraps, and when she had enough scraps, she would make a quilt for their bedding.
So you just needed a little pieces to sew together.
Yes.
Oh, and so, did I show you this? This is how they would have cut the wool from the sheep, these shears. And I do have a coloring page that I'll send over to the school, and there's a picture of the man shearing the sheep with these shears. Okay, I like to talk about Paul Revere because he was a silversmith, and when I talk about Paul Revere, I think about he put his metal in here. He was a silversmith, so he would have used silver. So he would melt it in here with a fire. Remember, there's no electricity. He would have used a ladle like this. See, it's got two spouts. He would have dipped that in and poured it into a mold, and then he would have made a spoon. He made spoons and silverware and teapots. But how do you think he got that bent? He would have used an anvil. Anvils come in all sizes. This is the smallest one I've ever seen. So he would have taken this and pounded it and shaped his teapots, his spoons, or whatever. So this is an anvil, very important to have out on the frontier.
Yes, and if any of you know anything about blacksmiths, they had big anvils because blacksmiths made a lot of metal for the frontiers. They made pots, they made a lot of things, but in most cases they would use iron. They would have iron made here, even in Kentucky, and they would melt that down, and they would make the bands for buckets. They would make pots.
Bands for churns?
Bands for churns. Did you know that this is a churn? Do you know what a churn is? Again, you need to watch our butter episode. Julie, tell them about the butter churns.
Well, you put the cream that you get from the cow, you milk the cow in the morning, and the cream rises to the top, and then you ladle that off, and you put the cream in the churn. This one has a dasher, if I can get it up, and it looks like that, and you go up and down, and that will make the cream turn into a big glob of butter. There are many styles of butter churns. In my house, I think I've got like 7. So that was my great-grandmother's. This churn was my great-great-grandmother's. So the churn, it's on a paddle, and you turn the handle, and that's how you make the butter in this one. I've got a funny story. When I was a little girl, I played with this. And what I did, no, I didn't make butter. I put my Barbie doll clothes in there, and I didn't use water, I just churned it, and that was my washing machine.
That is a great washing machine.
So those are 2 early kinds of churns. Now this last churn I'm going to show you, you may have seen one of these at your grandma's house. This is a glass daisy churn, And it was popular, this is 1922 model, and it was smaller, easier to clean, and you just turn the handle, and you made your butter in this kind of a churn. So, and you can make butter in a jar, like we did on our other video. So there's lots of ways to make butter. What happened if you got sick on the frontier, Miss Bonnie?
Well, if you got sick and there were no doctors around, what do you think you might do? Well, I'll tell you what. Women on the frontier, they learned from their mothers and their grandmothers how to use different herbs and different things in the house to help people get over sickness.
I don't know what an herb is.
An herb is, you probably know the names of some of these herbs. Oregano, parsley, bay leaves, those are some things that we call herbs. And what they would do, there's a couple different things they might do. And Julie has an example of what they might use in the eastern countries along the east coast of the United States. This is more popular in the frontier. It's called a mortar. This is the mortar, and this is the pestle. And what you're doing is you're grinding. Sorry. You're grinding. Now when you grind, you're not doing like this. You're pushing down and you're turning.
So you twist.
Yes, and you're crushing the herb. And what we do sometimes is you might put an herb. For instance, let me think of some of the herbs. Parsley. If you have an upset stomach, you can put parsley in a tea and have parsley tea. Or you can put parsley in a poultice.
A poultice?
Poultice.
I never heard that word.
A poultice is where you make something, whether you crush an herb, or I have some other things that they may have used, and you wet them a little bit, because a poultice is usually a wet material that you put inside a little rag. Let me show you. And then you would tie it up with a piece of twine, and you would put it over a sore, or if you have infected finger, if you step on something, a nail. Even for snake bites, they use poultices to draw the poison out of the skin. One of the things they might have at home, certainly know what this is, right? And this. I'm sure you all have these in your home. This is an onion and this is potato. A potato is very good if you have an infection and you use a grater. You have one of these. You would grate this potato until it's just pieces, and you would put that in your poultice. Onions, I'll tell you what I use onions for. If you have a bad cold and you have chest congestion, this is before they had Vicks Vapor Rub. They would take an onion.
Or before, what's the thing they on TV? Mucinex or.
Oh yes, even before antihistamines, they would take their onion. They take the skin off, and actually you keep the skin for your onion because you use skins to dye with, dye cloths, different colors.
So it makes the cloth yellow?
It makes it a tan. You would boil the onion skin in water, and you dip your material that you've spun, and it would change the color. It would kind of make a tannish color. Anyway, you would take your onion then, and you would slice it. And you would put that in a poultice rag bigger than this, and you would lay it on your chest, and that should break up your congestions to help you cough better. And they didn't have many areas didn't have doctors for years and years, so it was up to the mother and the grandmother to know about these herbs and these kitchen items that can be used to help cure sicknesses. When we were talking about dyes, I mentioned onion skins. Another one, brown was a very popular color on the frontier. Can you guess why?
I think it's because so much is made out of wood.
And also because you get dirty, and so if you have a brown garment, it's not going to show the dirt as much. Walnut hulls were boiled and the material was immersed in the walnut hulls, and you let that cook for a while, and then you have a material that's brown. They used berries for red materials, but red wasn't as popular as the brown. Let's
So
see
you
what
would
it's-
grind up the corn, and then what would you use with
Okay, well this is you understand that one of the first crops that pioneers planted was corn. Corn was popular. Can you think what is made from corn? I bet everybody around here likes this.
I mean, what kind of a dish,
Yes.
food,
What kind of food would you make from corn?
besides just eating corn?
Or popcorn or whatever. There's something else that we bake in the oven. It could be cornmeal made into cornbread. In fact, cornbread is very popular here in Owen County. What pioneers would do is they would take their corn in the when they harvest it, and they would put it in their mortar and pestle, and they would start grinding it and grinding it. Now this takes a long time, and anybody who's been to any of my programs here knows that it takes a long time to grind it down. What you end up with is this. It's cornmeal. So all you have to do is add your water and salt and bake it in your oven, and you've got cornmeal or cornbread. Now, in pioneer times, they would make more like corn cakes because they would cook over the fire. Many cabins didn't have an oven that we know as an oven, so they would make this up and they would fry it either in a pan or over the fire.
Well, then all this work, didn't the kids ever have any fun?
Well, they did have some toys, and they did play. They played maybe a lot of the games that you still play, hide and seek, tag. Miss Julie's going to show you one of the things that children might make.
They, as you said, they grew a lot of corn, so they had the corn husk, and they would get the corn husk wet and then fashion them into different kind of dolls, and here's just one. Right. What else did they do?
Okay, these are a game of skills, if you were lucky. And this is just wood, so they had a lot of people around there, of course, building cabins and that. Most of the fathers were very knowledgeable in wood, but they might make a little game. This is called ball and stick, and I'm not very good at it, but you attach a ball to a string, and here's your stick. You notice the one end is kind of pointed, and what you have to do is try to toss that up and get this. What about you, Julie? You think you can do this?
No, I know.
The idea is to get the ball on there. You had to have a lot of skill to do that. Another game they may have played, this was probably for more well-to-do people. This is called Jacob's Ladder. And you notice that it's constantly going. Do you know why they call it Jacob's Ladder? Does anybody remember the story in the Bible where there was a ladder to heaven, and Jacob was asleep, and he saw this ladder come out of heaven, and it seemed to go on and on forever and ever. And that's what this Jacob's Ladder toy tells a story.
And that's just an optical illusion.
Right, because it isn't really, you notice there's only 2, 4, 6, but it does seem like it's going on forever. One of my favorite toys, and this you can do at home. If you have a button and a piece of string, it doesn't matter if it's 2 holes or 4 holes.
But you only use 2.
You only use 2 holes for the string. Now you notice the holes that I put the string through are opposite, they're at an angle with each other. If you have 2 holes, you just go across. Okay, so what you do is you go through those 2 holes, and then what you have to see is that there's like, what is that? Looks like an oval. You tie the string, and what you're going to do is you're going to twist this around and around and around and around till it's very tight, and then all of a sudden you're going to go in and out. And my string broke.
That was the pioneer version of a fidget spinner.
Right, that's a fidget spinner. We call them humming bee toy. It makes kind of a noise. I'm going to try this again.